It is about cake. We had 3 presentations on BIDS, and I thought that will be heavy enough. So let's make this very light and easy. What I want to do in this presentation is to get you kick-started a little bit. I know there's a lot of information, and it was for me as well at first, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a guideline how you can get started, and some tips and tricks where you can get extra information, where you can get help. So there's a cake. Converting your data set into bits, it's like preparing a cake. Most of you probably might have already prepared this type of cake. It starts with a simple cake. Same with bits. It starts probably with an easy data set, one subject, only one modality, not too much data. You can still control it, and you can try to learn how to do the bits thing. But after a while, you make it a little bit more complex data sets. And then this is what happens when you start including ASL and PETs. So then it gets very, very crazy. But the first thing you do when you create a cake is you read the recipe. It's very important to read the complete recipe. Of course, you start at the beginning, and then, so first reading the ingredients, and then how you should do it. That's the same with BIDS. You go to the BIDS website, to the specification, and you start at the beginning. You don't start here. My professor, he wanted to do something. He wanted to convert his ASL data set. Yeah, Rick, many of you know him. He wanted to convert his ASL data set, and then he was like, oh, but this is not working, and this is not working. But that's because he started to read at the specific part of ASL. He didn't start at the beginning. So that's one of the best tips I have. Start at the beginning. Start reading in the introduction. The introduction will give you a bit more information on the whole idea of BIDS, why we do it, what the rationale is, what the ideas behind it. It will also give you a little bit information on how to cite it. Very important as well. And then you start with the common principles. This is more the whole idea how. We have to check a little bit what the definitions are, like here, the recommended, required definitions, but also what is a data set, what is a subject, what is a session, what is a run. All those terminology is very important to know how you should structure the complete data set. And then you can go further, you go to the modality you need. In my case, it's MRI. But here you have the modality agnostic files. Those are the additional files that need to be added in your BIDS data set. For example, you have a data set description, very important. You also have a README file. Some of these files are required, so you have to add them. Others are not required, but are interesting to add. There's also things like a participant file where you can add information about your participants. You can keep that very simple, just a list, subject 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you have more info, add more info, because once you start sharing it, I mean, for your goal, it can be enough just to have the patient numbers, but for somebody else, if I'm sharing my data set to Esther and she wants to do fancy, crazy shit with my data set, and she really needs, for example, the hematocrit values, and if I have them, at least she can use them. So try to add as much as possible information for others as well. So then I come to the specific files. I'm using MRI, so I'm talking mainly about MRI. Start with the basic part. Start at the top of the page, which is for the common fields. So that one will explain all the common fields for MRI, which are applicable for anatomical scans, also for diffusion, also for functional, for ASL, etc. Go through these as well, because you will need them as well. And once you get through the whole part, then you can dive into the specific submodality you need. For example, in my case, it's the ASL one, and then you will have more specific information for ASL. Here is important that, for example, in ASL, we are using several terminology, which was already used in, for example, task MRI. We reuse them, but instead of copying the whole thing, we are just referring to it. So it's very important when you see something like this, you just use search function, and then the page will show you where the information is, what you need. For example, here in the repetition time, it's optional in general, but for ASL it's required. So you might need to go look at it. So take your time to read the recipe, make sure that you know what's going on, what you need to do. And then you need to master your cooking skills. So when you're baking a cake, probably you will need to separate the egg whites and the egg yolks. It's the same with the bits. If you do it the first time, it's always searching a little bit, but we have some tools which might help you. So when you go again to the specification site, you will see that there's a subsection which is called a starter kit. And it's really a starter kit trying to help you kickstart the project. It has a repository on GitHub, but I think the most important ones are the wiki page and some tutorials. So I saw they also had some YouTube videos already, which is quite cool. But I haven't checked it. But make sure to check it. It's not there for every type of scan yet, but I think a lot of information will be there already, and it's work in progress, so I think it might help you a lot. Another thing, but I forgot to add it in my slides, is there are also examples. So you can find on the GitHub, maybe, yeah, I don't know if I can come back. So here, if you go to the GitHub repository, you can also find example data sets for many, many types of modalities. We added for ASL, I think, 5 data sets, but there are a lot for diffusion as well, for PET as well. So it's also very interesting to look into those and see how it's done, and then maybe compare if you have issues. So now I included at least the examples. I'm glad. And also there are a lot of papers out. If you have issues, remaining questions, take a look at the papers. The ASL one is following soon, but for many other modalities, yeah, I don't know if a lot of people use EEG or IEG, but it exists. You can also read, and many of those papers try to explain as well why the decision was made to do something that specific way. And then what was I'm going to try to say here? Sorry, it was a horrible night. And you also have then the validator, which can also helps you with help you to check if your data set is correct or not. So wait 1 second. Yeah, okay. So but that will come back later. And then you start gathering your ingredients, the eggs and the butter and the flour, etc., to create a cake. That's the same here. You start to collect information in your study. So you have, yeah, on the left, it's my a data set, for example, for one subject. You see there's a lot of naming there. DI, which is for the difference files. You have ASL, you have localizer. EP2D, RSN is resting state. I mean, I know it, but you didn't probably, especially if you don't have Siemens, you won't know it. So that's important that you have. You also need do we have a pointer? Yes, we have a pointer. Here, for example, is the structure for one subject. I had several runs. You need to know how many runs that you have, how many times was it subject scanned. This is an example of all the subjects I have, and I also have a lot of additional information. So like I said, it's not per se necessary to add all this information, but it's very nice if you want to share it to add this information. And this one, especially for the quantitative ones, is very important. And maybe that Wiebeke will help you a bit, because you said, where do I have to find the information? That's a protocol file that I got from the scanner. So if you can get this information from the scanner, I think that's very valuable, because a lot of those parameters that are in there will be needed in your data set as well when you convert to bits. So why is it important? This slide is mainly to explain why it's important to try to do the conversion as soon as possible after acquisition. Again, an example from my own lab. I think around 2010, I'm looking at Jan. Do you know the exact year, the NOMAD study? 2010-ish, something, yeah. So there was a study, and they scanned, in my lab, 100 healthy volunteers, elderly. It was done by a colleague who has long left our lab already, and during the whole period of the scan session of the whole study, they've been changing some parameters. But then that person left, and then the data set was just there waiting for somebody to analyze it. And then I think Jan came, and Henk Jan and some people there, and they said, oh, let's do this. Let's try to analyze it. And now they notice the changes here, but it's not documented. So they don't exactly know what happened, when did it happen. And it's a lot of work for them to try to get something out of it. So don't wait until maybe you will sometimes analyze it to convert it to bits, but do it after acquisition as soon as possible, just to make sure that your data set is clean and people can use it. And then you have to gather your cooking tools. I don't know if somebody knows this tool. This is a Thermomix, Esther knows it. So it's actually a very cool tool. You can just put your ingredients in it, and then it creates something more or less. A lot of cooks like it. And we do have those kind of tools. There's a very cool website provided by BIDS, which is called BIDS Apps. You can use the QR code if you want to look at it. And there's a whole list of apps that you can use to convert your data set. So what do these apps generally do? They convert it from DICOM to NIFTY. They also mostly add, I think, JSON files with a lot of information from the DICOM header, and some, I think, also try to organize it in the right structure. But I will come back to this, and it's what Henk-Jan said. It's not the best. I mean, these tools make mistakes, but it's a good start. You can try to use them, see which one works for you, and also important, check what the latest version is. So it might be possible that some app hasn't adapted the latest changes in BIDS yet, so check the release versions of BIDS and that of the app. I haven't added the other two that Henk-Jan told us, PyBits and the BIDS MATLAB. I know that Cyril is a big fan of those two, so Cyril knows more about BIDS. I believe him. But I think you will easily find this information as well. But there are many apps ongoing. And if you would like, if you would search it on GitHub, you will find many more apps doing the same thing, very lab-specific apps or something, but there are a lot of things ongoing. For example, for the Explore ASL team, which is Henk-Jan and Jan mainly, they're also implementing a conversion tool in their software for ASL specifically. So there's a lot happening, but once you get your data set out of it, I mean, it's a machine, everything can go wrong. It can apparently almost explode. I didn't know that. So that's the same, you need to check your data set to be sure. And what can you use for this? Well, we have the BIDS Validator. So they also created this and they update it with every release, which is very easy and very handy. So I have here an example of how it can look like when you have it's one of the ASL examples, by the way, how it can look like on each level, the data that is in there. So if I would add this one, I would so choose here, sorry, it's in Dutch, bestand kiezen. So choose file, and then I choose, for example, here the Philips case. And then I will get this one because it's a clean one. We made sure that there are no errors or warnings. But that's probably not what will happen when you do that the first time. Probably it will look like this. So you see here, there's a red line with errors, 5 errors in 6 files, and 10 warnings in 9 files. Well, those are 2 different types of mistakes in the data set. So if we look into that, I will first show you the errors. The errors are actually issues in the BIDS fields that are required. So those are the fields that you really, really need to make sure that they are included, that they are correct, in order to to be BIDS compliant. When you click on those, you will see that it will open more and give you more information on which file has this problem, and then more explanation, a little bit more explanation on what you should do, how you should change it. So those are the errors. These you really need to change and make sure that those work. And then you have the warnings. The warnings are a little bit more like I said with the participants file. If you don't have the info, okay, don't add it, don't lie on it. It won't help anybody by just putting a value in it just because you want to make sure there's something. But add it if you have the information, because it can be very helpful. Where the errors, so the required ones, are, for example, for quantitative imaging, very important to be able to quantify your images. The warnings are more important to but they are less important for quantification. I mean, you can do your work, but it will explain a little bit more, for example, if you have between side differences, etc. So those might be very helpful for that. So try to make it as clean as possible. And it's some work, and that's maybe, yeah, what happens next is actually that you try to hide your imperfections of your cake. And that's the same what you will be doing here with your BIDS data sets. So all the errors and warning, you will start using all your other information, like the protocol file, and you will start to add some extra information in your JSON files to solve these errors. And then you start doing it all over again. You go back to the validator and you put it in the validator again, and then you'll see, oh, instead of 5 errors, I will have 3 errors. Okay, what next? And you keep on working on it until it's completely clean. But that's mainly when you do it for the first time. It will get better when you do it several times, of course. But after a while, I mean, your data set is clean, you can use it, and your guests or the people you share it with, they can enjoy your data set, they can very much use it in a good way. So a good way to share it, and I think Cyril already mentioned it, there's a project which was together with NBIT. It was actually mainly NBIT who's done this. They created a repository for brain imaging of tumors. The advantage is that this is GDPR compliant, but if you have questions about this one, you can ask Cyril afterwards because he knows more. But what I wanted to say is that this is now, since last week, incorporated on our website. So if you go to glimr.eu, you will see on the main menu that BITR, you can click on it and you can start using this one. So it's a very good platform to share your data. And then, yeah, what if this happens? You do the data set and it's not working, and the time after you have the same issue and again and again. You have several completely wrong SpongeBobs. Then you can start using this platform, which is a Neurostars. I think many of you might know that already. But there's a specific tag for BIDS. The BIDS maintainers are using this and they are claiming that they have a more than 90% response rate. So if you have a question, put it on, first maybe look if somebody else asked it, and then put the question on it and they will help you as soon as possible. So yeah, I think I told most of it. I hope you guys now have a little bit an idea how to get started, but I think the biggest tip is just do it. And it's the same with everything, I think, in what we do. Just try and see how it goes and then try again. And after a while, you get used to it. But it's a very, very great way to store your data, and you'll be so happy when you've done it. So I don't know if there are any more questions.